Alexa, tell NDC Oslo to say hello.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
Doesn't that sound like every single debug session ever? Hello, welcome. My name is Heather Downing, and thank you for joining me to talk about Alexa. I actually do all sorts of things in voice, in case you are interested. So I do things on Google Assistant as well as some Siri work. I've done many years of mobile development, and I've gotten to work, fortunately, on some fantastic projects right from the get-go. So when I started as an intern, my very first project was a very well-known American company that would do your taxes for you. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but ever since then, I've never looked back, and I like solving problems in the enterprise world. While I really enjoy doing little side projects and little Hello World style code, I've found that it's not usually applicable to the real world. Would you say that's also the case? Yes. So the kinds of things I'm going to teach you today is a little bit more about how we make things easier and how easy it is to integrate with Alexa itself, since it is such a popular platform. If you're interested in following me, I have some social media links up there, and at the end I'll give you a bit.ly link to this deck in case you want to use it for reference. So let's get started. This is an interesting statistic. I'll throw a few of them in front of your face. But 30% of our interactions, they're saying, will be through conversations with smart machines. I actually think that's probably a little bit conservative. We already talk to our personal assistants on our phones now. So when we say through voice, we're actually not talking about mobile. We're just talking about standalone voice-activated devices that are purely just to be in a neutral place in the home, or perhaps in a business. That's a pretty big, significant number. So since that is growing and growing year by year, and there are over 12,000 skills right now in the Alexa Skill Store, why aren't we more excited about that? I personally loved the keynote earlier from yesterday because he kind of demonstrated a little bit of the frustration that we experience when you talk to a voice assistant. 69% of the around 7,000 Alexa custom skills alone have one or no customer reviews. Ouch. That is not good for something that has so much potential. Here's an example of one of the reviews. I have a brand new $80,000 vehicle, and all they can do so far is have her lock his doors, but he can't actually check if they're locked or not. What's interesting is that this user goes on to say, I know it's probably not the platform, which we would call a power user, or a user who's well informed as to what his technology can do. I know that BMW just simply hasn't made their skills smart enough yet. Ouch. So again, the technology is available, but the decisions that we make maybe aren't that great. So I'm going to give you kind of a 2-for-1 in this presentation. I'm going to give you a little bit about why you should do a skill and how you should think about it, and then we're going to build one. Sound good to you? Great. So before I go too far, my mom doesn't believe I actually speak technically, so I would love to take a picture of all of you if you wouldn't mind. Ready? In 3, 2, 1. Oh, nobody threw their arms up. I'm disappointed. All right. So let's get down to the brass tacks, shall we? Why should you build for voice? This is a question I get asked all the time. I'm a .NET developer. And they're like, why should we stray at all from what we're doing now? It's just a fad. It's just going to go away, right? Yes, just like the internet was a fad to the Sears CEO, and that's why they didn't have an online presence, and then Amazon swooped in and took away all of their online shopping business. Or maybe another well-known company that said mobile is a fad, it's really going to go away, and then entered the market years too late to really take the market share. When it comes down to what we invest our time in as developers, the first time I saw like a really good platform, which is the one we're going to talk about today, I got excited because I felt like now we have a lot more direct contact with our user. There is no visual interface. That means that we are more responsible for the communication than ever. That's why this is a game changer. Voice has been around for years, right? It has been around. Who has ever called up their utility company and gotten a voice prompt, right? Is that not terrible? You go through 40 of these questions that make you feel like you're on a night crime television show. And you never get to the person that you want. And finally, you just ask for the operator. So that's IVR, right? Those are voice prompts that don't really have any sort of intelligence behind them. But because we are in the age of machine learning, we can actually hook this whole interface up directly to some of those options to have a better experience and give us more insight as to what the user is actually going through. Remember that longer-lasting products have tapped into some sort of basic utility that, when applied to in the technology, has actually made their life better. So, for example, right now the most popular Alexa skill that is out there that is in the e-commerce world is Domino's. So Domino's Pizza has thought this really well through, and in the first quarter of 2017, they took an additional 8% of the overall market share in the pizza world. I mean, that's crazy, just because of their voice interface work. Because they thought about, would this be better? How long does it take to use this on my phone or call somebody? What if they already had a profile saved and all they had to do was ask to reorder a pizza and confirm that they want it now? I mean, that was huge. That convenience has kind of led to a little bit of a renaissance in terms of the voice interface world. Because again, it's been around for a while, but it didn't really have a good way to be built until a few of these products stepped forward. So, when we talk about the right way to build voice, these are some maxims that Paul Grice has come up with, right? I would say he is sort of the father, in a way, of modern, correct voice communication, all right? He says there are 4 things you really need to do in order to have it be effective. You need to make sure that your quality is there. Make sure that it's a very truthful interaction with your user, that your quantity is very minimal. So you don't want to go on and on and on and drone on for a long time as if this was a script from Lord of the Rings. You need to make sure that you just say just enough to let the user get a word in edgewise, right? You need to make sure it's relevant to the situation. Because I work at a company that right now deals with brands all over the world. So we have, we're responsible for Wendy's, we're responsible for Ford Motors, we're responsible for lots of these huge companies. And it was very important at this point that we say, this skill is not a walking or talking advertisement for you. This is how you directly communicate with your user. And of course, lastly, the manner in which you do it, being very, very clear. Sometimes, because we are trying to be overly precise, we lose clarity because we think the way our computers think, right? And sometimes that comes across as cumbersome to the people who try to use the skill. So what good is it for you to build a skill that I send you guys off with today without knowing these maxims? You won't be successful unless you think about them. If you take away nothing else from this session, just know this. We do not train our users in voice. Voice is natural. Therefore, we have to make the experience natural. It's not intuition. It's just nature. Therefore, do not train your user how to use your skill. Make sense? Okay. So let's go over the cooperative principle, shall we? This is kind of what a common pathway might look like. I'm sure many of you probably have a voice-enacted device, right? So the happy path we might think of when we're building this is, the user might say, set an alarm. And you say, okay, for when? And you say, Tuesday at 6 a.m. because all the context is within that response, right? And then the UI might say, yes, done, your alarm's set for Tuesday at 6 a.m. But if you think about somebody who might be getting ready in the morning, and maybe they have little ones, or maybe you just have a lot of animals. I have horses, but, some people have little dogs running around, and they're trying to make sure everything is going according to plan. People who use voice tend to multitask. So they may only give you part of the context, like you see over here. So much more cooperative way to do this, instead of putting your hand up and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying. Kind of like what we did right in the very beginning here, is that, okay, if they give you part of your information, take it, and then clarify or ask for the additional piece. Don't completely outright reject the path, because that's not really how we talk. If you glean anything from what another person is saying to you, you gain a little bit of context. Use that context when you build your skills, and people are more likely to be able to use it. So conversational implicature. Has anybody ever heard of this before? All right. Here's a good example. Jacob says, I really need a drink. And Todd might say, well, have you been to the Scotsman? This kind of response is something that is comfortable for us. There's a lot that is implied by this response, right? First of all, if we were to code this, how would we think about it? Does that look like a question or a statement? It looks like a statement. I need a drink. What you're really saying is, I need a drink, and you're begging for a suggestion, right? That is the way that we are in different parts of the world. It might be a little different. That's the way we are in our culture, right? We have all of these little isms that is to be known that is either verbal in some sort of brevity or nonverbal. So what is implied by this statement is that the Scotsman served drinks, the drinks are alcoholic, the Scotsman's open for business, it's nearby, and it's someplace that I might really like, right? Because what is also implied by here is that when Jacob said that, I was standing right next to him. So you don't have all that context when you're building a skill. You don't know who's also in the room with that user. As a side note, PubConf is at the Scotsman, so you all should go. If you're interested in the documentation of some of the things that we're going to go through today, you can get them pretty easily at this link. So let's talk a little bit about what we want to build, okay? So now we've kind of gone through a little bit of the guidance of what good conversation means. That it is up to you, and this is not a design session. I just want that to be the first thing you think of when you think, I want to build a skill. The next question is, well, what do you want to build? In the world of Amazon and Alexa, they have 3 different kinds of skills that you can build, and it's actually expanding more and more every week, but these are the main 3. You can either have a flash briefing skill, a smart home skill, or a custom skill. Flash briefing skill looks something like this. Basically, flash briefing is a part of an RSS feed that's accumulated from all sorts of different skills that are presented to the user every day. So usually this is a very brief little snippet of information that can be dynamic, that changes daily. A good example of this is the weather, maybe some current events that are happening. For anybody who may follow Wendy's on Twitter, this would be a perfect example of what I might suggest to my client. I might say, you do these little tweet wars between yourself and Burger King and McDonald's. Maybe I want to listen to the snarky tweet of the day in my flash briefing. That's a perfect example of how you can bring that to the company you work for, or maybe an idea for yourself. A smart home skill is probably one of the earlier examples that were used for Alexa, is being able to turn on smart devices on and off. And not just on and off, but maybe with thresholds of how much and how little. There's actually a whole kit. It's very easy to do. Something that I really enjoy is that you can actually do this with anything. If you have a Raspberry Pi or anything small, you can build your own whatever it is. It doesn't have to be something that's pre-packaged in order for you to interface with it. But this is the one we're going to spend the most amount of time with, because this does not assume that you have any sort of aggregated information that you want daily, and there's no assumption of any sort of physical devices, although you certainly can tie into those as well. The flow kind of goes like this. The customer asks a question, or gives their command, and then the Alexa interface on their server will identify the skill's name that they're asking for, analyzes it, and understands the customer's request, and then sends it off, okay? Then we get it. So there is a little bit of natural language processing that goes through on Amazon's servers, okay? So what we get is we get a little knock on the door, just like a click event, okay? Saying, hey, this event has fired, and here's some dynamic information that you asked to go along with it. Here are your parameters directly from the user. So at that point, we do not have the audio file. We already have parsed information in text form, and not the whole thing, just whatever parameters that we have identified we need in order to carry out our function, okay? So then we can decide 2 things. We can either send it back as a JSON file of, this is the way I want you to structure the response, and say it to the user, or you can also send over a little visual counterpart. So something that kind of comes along with users who have the skill is an Amazon Alexa app, and you can kind of see anything that you have done today, anything you've said. Has anybody ever used Alexa before in this room? Oh, cool. All right, so at least about half of you. That's pretty good. It actually has changed, and it's improving. So something that they just recently put in was the ability to call people. It's pretty cool. I liked it. And also, additionally, is they've given the custom skill builder the ability to add things to their Amazon Prime shopping cart. Also really compelling, especially if you're trying to build this for a company who wants to put items in a cart, right? Because that way, you can maybe fine-tune the process a little bit. So what are the components that we're going to be building, right? Let's take a look. The first one are intents. So these are the different terms I'm going to use as we're building this out. Intents are basically commands the user can access, and you can think about them as events. This is kind of what a little example of the JSON looks like. It's very simple. It comes in as an intent object, and it has different slots for different pieces of information. Maybe the user is additionally giving you, or maybe none at all if there isn't anything specific and they're only just invoking the event. Then there's sample utterances. So these are specific words and phrases that the user says for them. There can be so many different versions just to put into a single one. It's a one-to-many relationship, right? All of these different ways of saying it can invoke that. What's important to know here is that Alexa does have some, we're going to call it fuzzy logic, built into it, right? They have an AI backend, but often I have to add them myself. So as a developer, you need to think about how many different ways can a user say this and mean this. A good way to try this out is try someone who's very, very young, like under the age of 8. Try somebody who's not technically savvy, maybe an older person, somebody who is technically savvy, who learns pretty quickly, and somebody who knows a skill already. Ask them to do something basic, and instead of telling them what to say, see what they're going to say. It's actually really fun to be able to do with people who are non-technical. I like having skill sessions. I usually just give everybody Skittles and popcorn, and we just come up with different ways we can invoke this skill that would make sense to them. Next, we have invocation name. So invocation name really has to do with your skill itself. So there are many things you can say that are built into Alexa, and it will assume you're talking directly to Alexa's backend unless you are invoking someone else, a third party. So instead of saying, Alexa, tell me what time is it, I might say, Alexa, ask the charmer, what time is it? I don't know. And maybe that is a charming response. Maybe it's formatted to be very flattering in all of the responses to the person. You never know. There are many skills for many things, and we never saw Angry Birds coming, so you just never know what voice skills is going to take off. All right. Fourthly, you're going to think about your cloud service. Now, you can instead go ahead and use AWS Lambda, which is just a function that's inside of their ecosystem. But because we're going to build this on the Microsoft stack, I decided to kind of just label this as the cloud service in general. It doesn't have to be hosted any particular place, just a couple of things to do differently. But primarily, this is where you're going to do all of your business logic. Then your portal configuration. This is where a lot of your time is going to be spent, believe it or not, is staring at a web page and tweaking your schema and tweaking your sample utterances. That is where you're going to be spending a little bit of your time. This is probably the best example of building for a project that requires a test-driven development approach. You have to test it. And you have to understand that you are not the one that is parsing any of the speech from the user. That's Alexa. So because of that, you might run into things that she doesn't understand. And that's okay. If you get that kind of a situation, sometimes it's because the AI needs to learn your voice. Across the street from me, I have a neighbor from Afghanistan, and his daughter likes to go right up to my door, my apartment, because I have an Echo right next to my door, and she likes to shout through the door at it to see if she can talk to it. I know it sounds kind of silly, but she has a very heavy accent, and after about 1 or 2 sessions, it learned that this user profile has an additional user on it that has this kind of an accent, so it runs it through a different NLP processor. So it learned, and it's able to respond better and better each each time. It's kind of fascinating the way it's done. Cortana is very similar as well. I just thought that that was neat that she decided to check out all the different things that I do. So I actually have a what's new skill that I just add anytime I make changes to custom skills that I do. I just add the names of them and what they do to my what's new skill, and she shouts to the door, Alexa, tell me what Heather's new skills are today. And that's how she learns, is without even going into my house. Very silly, I understand. But it still kind of drove the point home, because I was able to capture some of that data later on to discover I actually had like 2 different users and yet 1. All right, so let's talk about the components a little bit of any sort of visuals, right? So this is kind of a real basic, stripped down version of HTML that allows you to, in addition, put any sort of instructions or maybe some sort of review material. This is something that you can do alongside your voice request. So it's all built into one JSON schema, right? You can write down, what you want Alexa to say, but also what you want to display inside the app. This is fully functioning HTML, so you can do additional links. You can put video in here. You can put all sorts of custom styling. It's pretty nice. But let's say that maybe your user doesn't have a phone. Maybe your user is younger. Maybe your user is older. You can also do a tethered screen. This is kind of a cool example, not something that my company did, but another one out in California, where Nestle decided that they wanted to help people who can't retain a lot of information. I happen to be one of those people. I have memory issues. So while you're baking, they decided that some people might have a television or a computer in or near their kitchen. So while they're talking to Alexa to get the next step, they also kind of mirror some of that information visually and set that up as like just a node app and kind of cycles through that listens to the same kind of events. It's pretty cool. There's lots of things you can do as things are growing. All right, so our cloud-based service that we're choosing is Microsoft Azure today. And while this seems like a whole lot of different things, it's always changing. Amazon has kind of really dedicated themselves to improving rapidly as all sorts of other competitors are entering the market, like Actions on Google or Google Assistant has been around for a while, and they have a very compelling case to use it at Google I/O this year. And then, of course, WWDC, they just had an announcement from Apple that is also going to be a standalone device for Siri, but mostly around music. That does not mean, though, that we can't extend it through SiriKit. So because of this, they're trying to pare this stuff down and make it a little bit easier to understand for developers, but also make it secure. Amazon is the most secure voice assistant right now because it does not hand you the audio file. You don't get to have access to it. Sorry, it's the way that it goes. So it's actually easier in some ways because you don't have to run it through your own custom processor. However, when you're building this, there are some bumps in the road, right? I found that they're very specific about what kinds of audio files you can play, and right down to how you encrypted them and how you encoded them. So just kind of go over a little list of the checklist in the beginning of the portal tour that I'm going to show you. And that does change probably about every 45 to 60 days. Just bear that in mind. So now that we have kind of an idea of the verbiage that we're going to use, let's go over custom slots and built-in intents. This is an example of a whiteboard session that maybe you would do if you're trying to decide on what kind of skill to build. You put the intent name, because usually the intent needs to come first. Now, 9 times out of 10, that usually works the best. However, sometimes you can invert it depending on how you want to structure your grammar. Then your sample utterance, which is maybe like, give me this thing, and then your custom slot. So right here, instead of just saying, get me my horoscope today, you don't know necessarily which horoscope sign to use. So in this case, you would use a custom slot. So when your data comes over in the JSON structure, it would come over as a slot and a key value pair and whatever the user spoke there. So this might be Pisces, this might be Virgo, right? And so then it's up to you at that point to match and go on from there. This is a very traditional way to build any sort of voice skill, not just Alexa. All right, let's take a look at the portal, shall we? Okay. There we go. So if you have just a basic Amazon account, you already technically have access to this portal. You just need to go ahead and sign a little I agree session. Okay. Good deal. All right. I got to do two things at once. I mean, I'm multitasking here too. All right. Are you serious? We had such good internet this morning. I am now disappointed. Oh, there we go. Okay, so when you log in as a developer in the console, you have all these options at the top. They recently did a redesign, so now if you want to kind of go and start an Alexa skill, you have to click on the actual Alexa tab up there, and then a couple of things will come up. There are two different kinds of ways that you can interface with Alexa. You can use Alexa voice service, which is what you might use in a connected car, or anything where you don't want to go directly through an Amazon device. You want to go through maybe your own device, but still use the power of their service. That would be the Alexa voice service there. But we're going to do Alexa Skills Kit. All right. Okay. Now, I've done a couple of skills already, so you can kind of see a list of different ones that it's refreshing right now. And this is also the place where you would add additional languages. So if you notice right here, under NDC Oslo, I have both US and UK. Now, I chose UK because I personally like the accent of hearing somebody from the UK, but it also works a little bit better in this region. So there are reasons for it. There's also German as well. All right, so let's say that we're going to dig into this. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to come upon is just what is the name and the invocation name. If you notice, I actually spell out NDC up there. That's really important, especially if you do any abbreviation. That way, the NLP parser will be able to direct them to your skill and not something else that sounds similar to it. You also have options whether or not you have an audio player or not in this. For this example, we're going to go ahead and leave all the podcasting to another session. So then we'll go straight into your interaction model. This is what tells Alexa exactly what to give you and what you're going to be able to do with it. It's pretty easy, pretty simple. You just go ahead and put your JSON right up there. Any custom slot values, you put right here. So you might just add a slot type and call it whatever you will, and then you can go ahead and add any specific values. This works really well for a predefined list. So this is important to keep in sync with whatever you have in your backend. And then sample utterances. So this is where you would put them. Anytime you have a slot name, it goes in curly brackets right there. And then that brings us over to configuration. So if you notice, there's two different kinds of endpoints that you can use. We're going to go ahead and use HTTPS protocol. And this one is set up in North America, but we can also do Europe, and you can do a different endpoint if you wish, right? Okay, and then over here, down here in permissions, this is going to become really important as you build more and more skills. So additionally, you can just start and add a skill by saying the skill name. Currently, there's no gated process. You can just start talking to a skill. However, if the skill requires any sort of authentication, you're going to have to stop what you're doing and direct your user to finish authentication on a mobile device so that they can keep any of their passwords separate. It also will prompt them to give access to, when it says device address, we're talking about the device of like the specific Echo device, not a phone. Okay, so this means wherever that device is currently, and you as a user have the option to set that up ahead of time, so you don't have to keep answering those questions from different skills. And then, of course, you can have access, read and write access to the list option within Alexa. Over here in the test section, let's see if I can get over there. Maybe. No, come back. Of course not. That's all right. Okay. So basically over in the test section, if it will ever come up, maybe one of these days. Nope. Doesn't like me. That's all right. No problem. So in the test section, you can do all of your testing as a text to speech. So instead of having to own a device, that's where you would actually just type out examples of what you're trying to invoke so you can start debugging what you're building in your service. And I probably spent a good 20% of my time on this tab. It would be great if they would show it to you. That's all right. Not to worry. And then publishing information will come at the very end once you're really happy with everything that you're doing. You just answer a couple of questions about what you want to put on their app store, and you're off to the races. Maybe it'll show us this time. That would be awesome. All right. All right, so let's just talk about a basic skill. Kind of looks like this. I just started a new project, a new Web API project. And the first thing I did was I created a little folder called Speech Assets. While this is not going to be used directly by your service, it's important that you keep some sort of log of what you're using right now. In this case, it would be your intent schema, maybe right here, and any sample utterances. This is the place that I store any changes and additions to. I touch this a lot. And that way you can go ahead and just copy this right over to the portal, and everything should be in sync. All right, and then let's go into the models, shall we? So right now, like I said, there is not an SDK for .NET, for C# specifically. There's all sorts of example projects on Node and Python and even Go, but there isn't anything for C#. But it's not really that big of a deal. Walter Casada actually reverse engineered the way that one of their Node SDKs were and discovered the JSON behind it. So thanks to his hard, heavy lifting, we actually just have that. It's pretty easy. So over here in the controllers, I created a controller, right? It's a really pretty basic one. Here, all I'm doing here is setting up any sort of launch request. So that means when somebody just says, Alexa, launch the name of your skill, you can handle any sort of launch requests immediately. Intent request means you might say, Alexa, launch my skill and tell me X. So tell me X would be an intent, okay? And then session ended request would be if you were to say cancel or exit, you can actually stop a little bit of that process and give a custom farewell or a reminder on the way out the door. Make sense? Okay, what I have here that is commented out is important for anything that you're doing for publishing, right? So basically all we have right here is checking whether or not this application ID is the same that is request that is coming in as the one that you have registered. So this is just a good way to keep somebody else from fishing for information in your service. And then under that is just a basic timeout. Good deal. So now that we have that all set up, we're going to go ahead and add a couple of models. So I have a request that will come in and a response. This one is a little bit more fleshed out, shall we say. But in general, the way that it looks is kind of like this. So JSON will change based on how much information you have set up in the portal. I've done a little bit of parsing myself to see what is the easiest way for me to have like a starter kit. And I've thrown that out on GitHub so you guys can take it and kind of expand on it. There's a section here, though, I want you to pay close attention to. If you noticed, under attributes, I have some custom attributes. This is custom for your skill. This is not built into Alexa. You just have to define what you want. It's a JSON key value pair. You can decide what you want to call it. I've added a member ID and the last intent name, and then this will get shuttled around as long as the session is live. So a session, whenever you say Alexa and everything keeps going, that is a session. But once she's done answering your question and her light goes away, then the session is over. So that means you lose that any sort of variables that you stick in that JSON. Make sense? Good deal. I do the same thing in the response down here at the bottom. If I wanted to, I've got output speeches. Let me grab that real quick. There we are. I also have session attributes in the response. So when I am building the response to send over to Alexa, I'm also just letting it set there. So I'm both receiving it and sending it. Any questions so far? Good deal. All right. Let's get into the meat of it then. Let's go to a request handler. Launch request is pretty easy. I like to put additional comments up there so that you can kind of follow along, especially if you're in a team and everybody's working on this at the same time. No, I don't think you need comments in order to explain everything, but it's incredibly helpful in voice so that you can see the intent of both what the user's saying and the result. This is what we're going for here. This is the voice happy path, if you will. So basically, because we created that model that kind of models after the JSON, we can do something very, very simple and just set the title, the content, any sort of output a speech that is a reprompt. So if you don't say anything for about 4 seconds, you can define exactly what you want Alexa to say to follow up with the user. And then you can define whether or not you're going to end that session. So maybe you want to keep the session alive. If you want to keep the session alive, you set that flag to false. And then you wait until maybe the user gives you another piece of information. This works really well for 1, 2, and 3-step conversations. In general, though, Amazon likes you to give brief replies. So whenever possible, trying not to, what we call, do intent sequencing is preferable. So that means that you want everything just to be quick and to the point. And of course, down here at the bottom, we don't really need to do anything with that because Alexa handles all of that. But in the event that you do want to say something custom to say goodbye, you could do that right there. Most of the time, though, is spent inside of the intent request. So because I added that session variable that you saw earlier, I'm able to go ahead and do some case switching. So let's say I say, Alexa, ask NDC Oslo to say hello. And then she says hello. And then I say hello again. So because I have already defined that the very last intent that I had was the hello intent, I can actually send it off to a completely different handler. It's kind of nice. So that's the way that I handle contextual intent sequencing. Okay? I just kind of break it down by whatever text the JSON's giving me and send it off from there. So let's look a little bit at what those handlers look like. All right, here's a handler, very similar to what we had in the launch request. A little bit additional pieces of information here. If you notice, there's an output speech type here. It's called SSML. We'll get into it in a little bit. But normally, if you just wanted to just say something very, very basic, you wouldn't even have to define the type. You could just use direct text without specifying, and you'll get, by default, whatever is set up through Alexa. So if you have somebody in the UK, might have different inflections in the way that she says things versus the US, but you don't have control over that if you do just what we call a basic response. SSML lets you do more. So this is all that is to it. It's pretty basic, isn't it? You're basically setting up JSON for something else to read. It's important to note that when you're putting this together, if you're pulling from a third party, let's say you're pulling from Twitter, there's emoticons, right? In little emojis, right? That is important to strip out because she will say, not smiley face. So it's important that you curate your content here. This can come from anywhere. I hard-coded it here just to show you, but this information can come anywhere. It's very, very simple to set up. It's important also that you have some sort of way to handle a custom stop or cancel. Amazon looks for this when they approve or deny a skill in the store. And then down here, we have a default. So if all else fails in my case switch, it usually goes to my default. This is so I can control the user experience and not have it be something that Amazon does. All right. Everybody with me so far? Good deal. So now we set all of that up. Most of this, again, is when you just file a new project, it's just built into Web API. I'm using Web API 2 here. And if you notice right here, I kind of have something commented out. Basically, I can override any sort of validation. So Amazon looks to make sure that you're validating a whole bunch of different pieces of information. And that's kind of how I would do that here. So I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview of that. So now that I'm not quite sure if the internet is going to work with me, I'm going to play you a video instead. All right. So this is kind of what that might be like. Computer, ask KC.net to say hello.
Hello KC.net user group.
Right, so this was earlier in a user group that I got to work with, and that's pretty much simply what we wrote there. Very, very simple. Maybe you want to do something a little bit more complex, though, right? This is all just basic information. And remember, we went over how important it is to retain context. So we have a little bit of context retention now, right? I might be able to say hello, and then she might say, oh, hello again, it's you again. Because now we've controlled both that context and the sequence. All right, so now that we have that, let's see. So I just showed you a basic demo. Let's talk about expression. So what I showed you earlier was speech synthesis markup language. That's something where you can interject little audio files, or you can control the pitch. You can make Alexa whisper. You can say anything you'd like in any way that you'd like. You can make her shout. All of it is now controllable through SSML. And this is also not a new spec, in case you're interested in that. This came out in 2003. Here's an example of what SSML might look like, okay? Right within just a basic string, you'd write out what looks a whole lot like HTML, but it's spoken. So this is maybe the place that front-end developers could pivot and spend a lot of their time, is to really craft something really cool. If you notice, you can put in pauses. You can add a little audio file that might play something really quickly. In my case, I really like Star Trek, so I added like the startup noise of the engines. And you can also have little interjections. So that means that interjections are being added to Alexa's library all the time. These are things that she can say with what we call extreme expression. So she might be able to say hooray or booyah, for example, right? This is how we can kind of pepper our voice interactions. And if you notice, we can also separate sentences. So right down to writing a bedtime story skill, you have the ultimate control over it. And if you want to know what the official spec is, it's actually out on W3. You're welcome to go ahead and grab it there. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like over here. All right. So right there, if you notice, I went ahead and just put in a little audio file, right? Let's play that and see what she says. Computer, ask Casey.net to say hello.
Hello, counselor.
Right. So what I did is I went ahead and I made her completely monotone. Believe it or not, Alexa is not monotone, especially lately. They've tried their very best to make sure she had a lot more expression. Okay. So now that we've kind of done a little bit of that, how far can you go with it? I actually played around with that just a little bit, and I'd like to play probably one of my favorite demos ever. Computer, start LCARS.
Hello, this is Starship USS Enterprise.
Hello.
Yes, Commander.
How are you feeling?
Well, well. Booyah.
Access code Alpha Alpha 305.
Command code Alpha Alpha 305 has been verified. Proceed.
Red alert.
Red alert.
For Starbase STS-112 Warp 6. I said so.
Course laden for STS-112. Ready at your command.
Engage.
Yes, Commander.
So that's my recon.
Cancel.
Acknowledged.
So those are all examples of something that I find really nerdy, right? I really like it. It was fun for me to do. I found the official, and just for those of you who don't know, the name of the computer aboard the Starship Enterprise is called LCARS. And there's also a visual interface to go along with it. So I went to their official LCARS website and was able to grab some of those audio files to kind of serve that up. It's really fun, and it was the very first skill that I ever made that actually went all the way through the publishing store. So that was really fun. It kind of is up to your imagination. While that one might be more novelty, I have since built 12, 13, 14 other skills for my clients that are completely useful. This one, though, I mean, every day I kind of use it. Not going to lie. If you want some additional references on how you can build this, there's a great article about intent sequencing to be able to do that all on your side. Okay. Also on SSML, you can play around with audio. There's another really great one. If you want to know how I built that skill, I actually threw it out on GitHub, and you can take a look file by file. Again, it's all written in WebAPI 2. And then there's a fantastic voice design video from James Giangola from Google I/O. While I understand that it's not necessarily just for Alexa, it's about voice design in general. And since we're the ones who get to play with this, since there isn't a creative person, right, that's working on this, we're the ones who get to build the experience. It's 40 minutes, and it's completely worth your time. Also, many thanks to Aldrich Casada. He has a great Pluralsight course on the beginning stages of how to build with WebAPI. And if you're interested in my slides, you can kind of get all of them here at this bit.ly link. Or at the very end, I'll also tweet it out. So before I go too far, I wanted to see if maybe we got this back. You just never know. Alexa, ask NDC Oslo to say hello.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
So very important to note that when that comes through, that just means that she can't reach the service. So that comes directly from Amazon servers and not yours. So it has to actually get over to you in order for you to do custom errors. That actually happens quite a bit in the very beginning, especially when you set up something new out on Azure or maybe any other host, where maybe the service went to sleep. Okay, and if you don't make sure that it's always on, it'll go to sleep, and that might be the response that you get. I don't know. I could try again. Maybe. Alexa, open LCARS.
Hello, this is Starship USS Enterprise.
Cancel.
Acknowledged.
So the difference between this one and the one that I showed you in the video is just language. So there are 3 options in the portal that you can have. That one was the exact same skill redeployed for the UK, right? So when I ask, just Alexa to say hello, she actually says something different for the UK and something different for Germany and something different for the US. Because everything's about cultural context within voice. It's very important to get all of that right. And so you will have to deal with globalization a little bit. And while right now the US and Europe is the focus, it's not going to be for long. China and Japan are getting ready to launch probably within the next month as well. So you're going to have lots of opportunities to serve many people worldwide and in their own language and cultural context. So, in conclusion, don't just come up with a voice idea. Instead, come up with an idea that can be best solved through voice, right? So a good example of this is that recently, you guys have a fantastic transit system here in Norway, I have to tell you. I've gotten to ride all over the place. But there are moments, maybe it won't show up on time. Back in Kansas City, where I'm from, we don't actually have any sort of really good way to tell how anything is going or how far away it is. So just kind of as something that we wanted to do pro bono, I got to write a skill for our Kansas City Transit Authority, right? So I got to do questions like, Alexa, tell me when the next 152 is heading north. Or, because that's just somebody who's a frequent user who might always know. And she's saying, oh, it's at 5:30, or it's not running right now. Or I might say something a little bit more simplistic like, Alexa, ask KC Transit to take me to Boots, right? Or a certain restaurant name. And so because of that, we hooked into Google's Maps API, and then we just discovered about how far away that was from your user's current location, because remember the device information that you can get from it in the very beginning. And then we started calculating about how long it would take to walk to that bus stop or to that train stop or whatever different kinds of transit option that you had. That was another way that we did that. And once we launched it, it was used immediately, right away, by people who actually didn't have a whole lot of money and were city dwellers. So these are things you can do that are actually very, very useful. It doesn't always have to be something fun, although that never hurts. So in conclusion, please keep skills short and to the point. Build efficient and executable code in less than 4.5 seconds. Oh, that's very specific, isn't it? Basically, if you start doing some sort of enormous machine learning algorithm processing and you require the user to wait until you get that response, Alexa takes over and says, you know, the requested skill just takes too long to respond, I'm sorry, and just cuts off the session right there. So it's important now that you take those big, huge, monolithic, enormous microservices that shouldn't have been monolithic but are, and really go down to the smallest that you can. Cache data if you need to. It's really important that this is speedy and fast. And adhere to the voice design principles. Again, don't be part of that 69% that have a really bad skill, because all of this is completely within our control. Usually when a user or a client comes to me, they actually don't know what they want. Does anybody have a client that knows what they want right away? Exactly. You have to help. So it's important that developers become educated as to what that is, what that means. I gave you a couple of things to think about, being, cooperative and being, using context and dealing with any sort of inference. These are things that you can control on your side. If you have a user profile, start saving the information against it. This is a user who asked for help at least once a week. Clearly they need a different kind of flow. Maybe you can do something with that information. This is perfect for AI. So if you do any sort of tinkering around with that, it works brilliantly. And most importantly, please have fun with this. It takes less than a day to set up your first skill. If the internet had cooperated with me, I would have just done it live for you, because it is that easy to do. And you can start tinkering around and doing more and more with it. But the beauty is in its simplicity. So pay attention up front. I'm not telling you not to have an agile project. I'm telling you to just think about who it is you're serving. Remember that your user will not go in just one direction. That means that you might have only 3 intents that you serve. It might be to respond to a hello. It might be to give information about some sort of transit time. Or it could be that your pizza's on the way. Either way, your users will say it differently. Instead of putting your hand up and saying, no, that's wrong, you have to precisely say it this way. You have to think about what would make them not be frustrated. That includes any profanity. So yes, I have absolutely added sample utterances that are slightly profane, just so that instead of stopping my user in their tracks and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying, you can say, I get that you're frustrated. Here's your information. Sorry about that. Because now we have context. And that's perfect also for machine learning again, because that means you can offload that to a process that takes a look at what kinds of intents you're hitting. Or if you wanted to, remember the big, huge sentence that we had with your invocation name and then your sample utterance and then your slot, you can make that whole thing a slot. For example, for someone's address, I just say, what is your address? And the user gives me their address. So there is no intent right there that they have to speak. They don't have to speak a name of an intent. They can just give me their address, and that is one big, long slot. So because I get that parsed directly, it's called a literal. So it's an Amazon literal slot. That right there is the power. That's when I can start taking that and processing it on my own time and my own servers and figure out more about that user. There's just so many different things that you can do with this, and it's not just limited to this. So once you start getting information from the user in this context, maybe you start helping to build that ecosystem so that no matter what they use, whether it's a screen, a phone, or a voice assistant, it all ties in together. That is the goal, and that's the reason why I threw it out on Web API, because it's so easy to make an API that you just extend another endpoint to serve a mobile app or to serve a desktop. So remember that varied user responses are opportunities, not errors. This is the biggest shift as a developer I had to go through. And let me tell you, the nested if thing is terrible at first. So that forces you to stop and reevaluate the way that you're building this, right? Take pieces of context as you're given them. And that way you're going to delight your user every time. The best skills that have stayed and have the best reviews can parse specific pieces of information and keep them contextually and allow the user to move forward instead of forcing them, training them to go down a path that they don't understand. Thank you very much.